Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Next Chapter. This week, we are joined by the one and only Laura Dave. She's out with a new book called The Night We Lost Him. Think of this as kind of like a soulful suspense family drama novel with a twist ending, of course. Dave is a familiar name to a lot of you listeners and readers. She's a New York Times bestselling author. You've likely heard about her last hit book, The Last Thing He Told Me. It's also a series on Apple TV starring Jennifer Garner, which was co-created by Laura. So Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to get to speak to you in person. Well, on Zoom in person, but thanks for having me.
Of course. So you're in New York right now on a book tour.
Yes.
What is it like for you going on tour talking about your newest book?
So I think I'm still, that's such a good question. As you can see, I landed on Wednesday night here, and the last couple of days have been a bit of a whirlwind. I'm getting my sea legs, and I'm really looking forward to it. Since the book comes out on Tuesday, I have a couple days to pull it all together. I love meeting readers, though. It's my favorite, so I'm so excited for that.
And we love meeting authors and talking to our favorite authors as well. One of my favorite things about this podcast. And Laura, we try to keep this a spoiler-free zone. So give us a synopsis. Great. What can readers expect in your newest book?
So my newest book, The Night We Lost Him, focuses on two estranged siblings who join forces reluctantly to investigate their father's suspicious death. It's ruled accidental by authorities, but they think something more sinister might be at play. And what they actually uncover, without any spoilers, is a 50-year-old family secret that actually may be the exact thing that led to this fatality.
How did you come up with this story, and why did you decide to talk about this sort of estranged relationship between Nora and Sam, something that unfortunately is common with people, to lose touch with their siblings?
So, what I loved about them being siloed from each other, Nora is her child from her father's first marriage, and Sam is a child from the father's second marriage, and they really didn't know each other growing up. And because they were both in their own way competing for their father's time and trying to understand why he would choose to compartmentalize them the way he did, and why he would choose to, live his life in the way he did. They're missing this secret, so they're missing this huge piece of it. They sort of viewed each other almost as enemies, too strong a word, but someone that they didn't want to have anything to do with. And because of that, I think that they missed the thing that connected them to each other, the connective tissue that they really needed each other. And so part of the journey of this book, which I really loved exploring, is what makes a sibling different than just a friend? What is it that we have in common? What language do we have in common with each other when we don't even really think we like each other? And how does that influence puzzle pieces in terms of mystery solving? If both of you know a piece of the man that you really still are yearning to understand, how can together you solve a puzzle that no one else is able to solve?
And you mentioned their father had, multiple marriages. That's not, a spoiler to say that. You know that from the very beginning.
Yes.
But one thing that I think is really beautiful that is not the case for most people that have been divorced is he still has positive relationships with the women of his past. Why was it important for you to include that when in real life and novels that's typically really not the case?
I did. So just like with The Last Thing He Told Me, this was inspired by a real world event.
Oh.
And the real world event here, I'm going to be less specific about because it's directly tied to the twist, but it was a succession battle at a children's publisher, I'll say that.
Oh.
And I started learning about the man at the center of that and how he was close with a variety of wives. And then I started looking at other men sort of in those power positions. Sumner Redstone, I read his biography and his unauthorized biography, and I read Empire of Pain about the Sackler dynasty, and all these men who found themselves in strong positions of power. And what I found to be so intriguing is that once you're sort of in their inner circle, it seems like you stay there. And but the compartmentalization that goes on feels inherently male. You never hear about women having secret families. We couldn't. Because we don't compartmentalize. We're the ones that operate in a relational way, keeping everyone together, working to bridge gaps. And I was so fascinated by someone. Why are those gaps so important to certain men, certain people, but specifically these men, and specifically to Liam Noon, who's at the heart of this book? And I love the idea that instead of it being a reason, both of my two last books that are sort of mysteries rooted in hope, I love the idea that as opposed to it actually having a sinister undertone, that it's rooted in love and in grief and in trying to understand oneself. And so that is why I really wanted that to be there, that siloing of his families.
And I really love that you said that, because on paper, Liam might be a character you don't like, or
Yes.
he might not be very likable, but I found him to be very likable, and like I wanted to know more about him, and he really seemed like a good father and a good person to work for by most accounts.
Yeah, I love playing with the idea. I love all thrillers. I love all mysteries. I can't get my hands on enough of them. But I don't see a ton in that space in which the twists and the turns aren't, well, actually the person closest to you is horrible. Like that is what you have to do because it's the a necessity of the genre. So I wanted to try to bend the genre a little bit. And what happens if the turn is the exact opposite of that? If on paper Liam Noon seems catastrophically flawed, but then the deeper you go in on his character, the more you understand the humanity there. How do we turn the mystery on that? And actually, because there's that 50-year long, I should say, love story at the center of all this, I love playing with Easter eggs in the past that Nora would find in the present and vice versa. And the way that generationally we speak to each other, even once someone is gone, even on the other side of grief, that there can be that conversation was something I really wanted to spend time with thinking about.
And grief is a big underlying theme in this
Yes.
book, and it's a
Mhm.
topic that I'm kind of obsessed with,
Yes.
just in my personal life, and I love reading about it because it's universal. We've all lost someone that we've loved, and once you kind of get to that point where you have lost someone you loved, you can't really stop thinking about it. What is it like for you to write about grief? Does it bring up your own personal losses and life experiences?
It really does. Over the course of working on this book, I lost both of my parents. I should say, I lost both my parents before I started working on this book.
Mm.
And over the course of writing the book, I think I was, in the book, there's a character who talks about how every novel is a love letter to one person that we're all peeking in on. And I've loved that idea for a really long time. And that's how I sort of approach writing. I think of it as my favorite kind of books, and the books I try to write are books that you can feel like it's a story being read out loud to you, almost
Mm.
like a letter. And when I think about this book, I think about it as a love letter to the two people that I was lucky enough to be parented by, and to the one I'm lucky enough to parent. And I think often about how does that influence how we talk about and think about grief? Because, of course, on one level, grief is heartbreaking and sad and the hardest thing. It's the flip side of love and something we all have to deal with. On another level, over the course of writing this book, started to think about grief as something positive, as a visiting, meaning sometimes we can look at grief and we want to push it away because it's painful. But what if instead we invite it in and we think, you're stop it. You can, because grief isn't something that goes away. It comes in waves. And what if the wave is a way of reminding you of the love unrealized, the love that you're getting from someone, the conversation you're still in with someone, even after you can't see them anymore. And when I started thinking about grief in that way, I imagined the whole book is a conversation between Nora and her father. And the result, the twist, the turn, everything that happens is the completion of a very loving conversation.
Gosh, I'm so sorry to hear about your parents. I mean, that's just such a big thing to go through. So I'm so sorry for your loss.
Oh, thank you.
And I liked what you said about people tend to push grief away, because I feel
Mhm.
sort of the same when you for me growing up, there were sometimes if someone passed away, we just wouldn't talk about them anymore, or you would try to just not feel any sadness. And there is something to be said about just kind of riding that wave for sure.
I saw this interview with actually Joaquin Phoenix and River Phoenix's mom. I think Joaquin Phoenix was promoting a movie, and his mom was within the interview. And it was before I lost my folks. But what she said was so moving to me. She was talking about, I mean, I can't even imagine the loss of a child. And she said, sometimes she stops at a stoplight and it's like she feels it in such an enormous way. But she does now look at it, and I don't want to misquote her, as that visiting,
Hmm.
as like, I think so many of us tell stories and read stories, especially mysteries and thrillers, because we love a sense of an ending that's comforting. We love a sense of justice. We love a sense of this is what was right, this is what was wrong, and now we're going to move to a better place. We're going to become the hero of our own lives. And I think about that in terms of grief, because in a different way, on the other side of loss, you have to figure out how to become the hero of your own life and get yourself to a better place.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a topic that I feel like I see more of, and I'm always happy to
Yes.
unpack all the very complicated, feelings that come with it. You
Yeah.
have a twist in this book, which we obviously won't say what it
Yes.
is. Is there
Yes.
is there anything that scares you in your real life as somebody that loves to read thrillers? I mean, is there anything that in real life you would be like, that is my biggest fear?
So, you know what's so interesting? So there's certain book like when I was a little younger, and even now, like no one that loves me wants to go to the movies with me, because like I think it's actually happening. Any sort of violence, like anything, like everything. When I say violence, like a tooth being pulled, like, from a child that has to come out, like, no, my son, he has to find someone else. I cannot. So, but movies scare me like that. But since becoming a mom, even books scare me like that. I'll be reading like Karen Slaughter, and I'll throw
Oh,
the book across the room because the violence is so real. And meanwhile, I know people who know her. I don't know if you ever met her, and said she's like the sweetest woman in the world. So I don't know where she is able to access that. But I think any sort of violence is terrifying to me,
yeah.
and that's something that I think about, and that I fear. Someone, being trapped in a situation, someone I love in a violent situation that I can't get them out of, is probably one of my biggest fears.
I've never met Karen Slaughter, but I read her book. I think it's called Pretty Girls. It was
Yes, I read that one
really,
too.
I don't think I read it like years ago. I don't think I could read
Yes.
it now again because it was so disturbing. And I remember posting it on my Instagram, being like, oh my God, I love this book so much so far. And everyone was like, wasn't that really difficult to read? And it wasn't until the end that I was like, oh boy, I don't think I would recommend it to someone unless I really knew them.
Okay, we're soul sisters on this, because I think I did the exact same thing. Like I'm like, I cannot put this down. And then I'm like, get it, put it in another room, put it in another. You have to be a brave kind of reader. I don't know if you know Jordy Moblo from Jordy's Book Club, who's a
Mm-mm.
great bookstagrammer. He loves Karen's books, and he'll recommend them, and I love his recommendations. And but he'll always like say to me like, you're gonna have to read it during the daylight with the light up for me, like because I'm such a wimp.
Yeah, you definitely need those disclaimers for sure.
Yeah.
So you're in the process, I understand, of turning this book already into a Netflix series, correct, with your husband?
A movie.
A
We're
movie.
writing as a
Okay.
movie. Yes, yes. The only reason I'm issuing that correction is that I wrote a TV show called The Last Thing He Told Me, for the
Okay.
last one,
Yeah,
based
yeah,
on the
yeah.
last one. And TV is a totally different beast than novel writing. And so even hearing that I have another TV show,
You're like,
I'm like, wait,
no,
no, no, no,
it's a
no, no,
movie.
no.
So,
I'm meant to be alone in a room.
yeah.
So for a movie, you can be still.
Yeah. So your husband, Academy Award winning screenwriter, what is it like working with him on a project?
We're each other's first reader, always. We've always sort of been in the foxhole with each other on things. And so I really love writing with him. I mean, he would joke during the pandemic. I mean, obviously, COVID's still around and everything, but during the heart of it, when we were home alone, he would say to me, like, I'd be like, "Oh my God, the world's so different." He's like, "No, you're made for this." Like, I've never left the house before that, so he's the only person I sort of see most days, and so I'm always, padding up the stairs to show him something, and vice versa. And so it's sort of a really natural thing. And we have different strengths. I really enter into screenwriting the same way I enter into novel writing, which is character first, emotion first. And he is much more cinematic in scope. So it's a nice marriage, no pun intended, of like how we write together. We sort of stay in our own lanes of what we're bringing to something.
How did you guys meet? Was writing, I know screenwriting and obviously writing novels is different, but was there a connection there, how you met?
We met because a really good friend of mine had a sister who lives in Los Angeles, and I was giving a reading at Book Soup, and she said to him, "I want you to come and meet my sister's friend. I think you'll like each other." My theory is that that was not true, that she just did not want to drive across the 405 by herself to go to this reading, so she brought him.
Yeah.
And the next day, I was in town for just one more day, and we all had coffee, and because that night I was, in the middle of it all, and with the work stuff. And actually, she's actually now quite a good friend, but at the time I knew her sister very well, and I didn't know her, and I could not remember her name when they came up for me to sign the books.
Yeah.
And I said to her, like, remind me how to spell your name? And she was like, the usual way. So like, I wasn't focused on him at all. I was just like, get me out of this chaos. And but the next day we had coffee, and then that night he and I had dinner. And this sounds so corny, and it sounds like Out of the Night We Lost Him or something, but I left that dinner and I called my mother and I said, I met the man I'm going to marry.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I really knew right away. Yeah. He did not. So the story's not all glowy. He was like, maybe I'll see you when you're out here again. I'm like, I'll see you at the wedding. So
I'm such a romantic. So I love those. I just eat those stories up. You know what I mean? I love hearing how people met. Especially when you work in careers that are kind of similar. I mean, you mentioned obviously screenwriting and writing novels is very different. What has it been like for you to see The Last Thing He Told Me on Apple TV starring Jennifer Garner? I mean, how could you not freak out when you hear Jennifer Garner is going to be in your show?
Well, so Jennifer Garner, let me start by saying, if anyone, of course, everyone knows Jennifer Garner, but if you sort of follow her on Instagram or something and you see like, wow, she seems like she's a really good human, she's an even better human than that. Like, she's an outstanding person. And I always would say, when we were working and I'd come home and I'd pinch myself and I'd say to Josh, my husband, I'd say, she's such a great actress, and she's like, you can't even imagine what kind of person she is. So it has been such a joy and a privilege to watch her bring Hannah to life, because she cares so much. And I always joke, she knows Hannah better than I do at this point. We were in wardrobe during the first season of the show, and Susie DeSanto, who's really this wonderful costume designer who's worked with Jen for decades, was picking out different robes for Jen to wear in one of the episodes. And Jen pointed to one and said, I think I should wear the purple robe because, purple's Hannah's favorite color. And I looked at her, I'm like, oh, I can see that. And she was like, you wrote it. It was on this page of the book. Like,
oh my gosh.
She really, that is who she is and how she is, which is a really long-winded way, but don't get me started on how much I love her. A long-winded way of saying, I feel so blessed and lucky that she is spearheading that show and that we get another season. She's going to be, we're doing another season. They start filming in a few weeks, which is wild.
That is so exciting. Yeah, she's like my comfort, follower, person that I follow, because she's posting about her garden, and she just seems so wholesome, and I'm like, I want to live with you in your house because it seems amazing to me.
I mean, everyone does, right? We all want to move into that house. It's really special.
So I know, your new book is out now. Is it too soon to ask you what's next? What are you working on next in terms of both TV and also novels?
So I am writing the sequel to The Last Thing He Told Me.
Wow.
Which I they're simultaneously working on the show. So it's been an interesting experience because I was really intimately involved in season one. But for season two, because I'm writing the sequel in close succession to the book, I sort of sat down with the writer's room and walked, the showrunner through like, well, this is what the book's going to look like. But I'm not in the room every day. I'm not, I can't sort of hear what they're doing because it will mess with me. So my goal is I have a draft of the book, but to be done with the sequel in November, and it's coming out next fall.
Oh my gosh, so
So
exciting.
that's what I'm deep into.
When you wrote it, did you know you were going to have a sequel, or was it just based on its success that they came to you and said, "Hey, we want another one"? How does that work?
So I was working on this book for 10 years. And for the first several years, I had one ending in mind. And it was only when I had my son that I realized this was the primal story of someone becoming a mother. So what that meant was of the 90,000 word manuscript, 70,000 words went away because that was leading to a different ending. So I always knew where I thought I was telling one love story between Hannah and Owen. I was really telling another between Hannah and Bailey. And once I realized that, the whole book shifted. But I still had that original ending in my heart and in my mind. I never planned on writing a sequel, but when people would say to me when they got to the end of the book, well, what happens next? I realized that I had the totality of the story in my head still. And I still had that original, the kernel of that original ending. And I'm like, I sat down sort of very quietly on my own and I thought I'm going to give myself a couple months and see if I think there's a sequel worthy of the readers who embraced the first book. And only if I really think there is, am I going to sit down and really write this sequel. So I wrote 100 pages. I gave it to my agent and my editor, and I said, what do we think here? Because I need to tell this story. I need to complete it. I need to write toward that original ending. And everyone sort of agreed, and here we are. And I'm very excited to share that sequel with everybody.
I can't wait. And it's exciting to just even know that's something to look forward to. I'm just like a little book nerd who loves to look forward to what's coming out next year already because it's already going to be like 2025 in a couple of months.
Ditto. And I don't know if you feel this way, but now I'm like, time is speeding up in a way that is uncomfortable.
Yes.
And so it's like it's going to be here before we know it. So yeah.
It will. Anything else you want readers to know about The Last Thing You Told Me, which is out now?
And you mean and also the night? Well, two things. One, I'll say with The Night We Lost Him, that's coming on.
Yes, that's what I meant. No. Yeah.
Let me I don't know why I named the books so close to each other because I keep calling it The Last Thing He Told Me when I go places, and my poor publisher is like, get the title. Okay. So what I would say is I have an Easter egg for readers, which it doesn't ruin anything, but in the first pages of the prologue, you get to meet Liam Noon shortly before his catastrophic fall. And he's remembering different moments of his life while he's standing on the cliffside. This is page 2. And he's remembering the mistakes he made at 60 and at 55 and at 30 and at 20. And a little Easter egg that's fun, I think, for the reading. And actually a bookstore manager just wrote to me and asked me if that was on purpose. So I thought I would share it today because I was glad that they caught that. Those are the very moments that we see in the flashbacks. So what he's remembering is what we're about to see. Okay. And it's a fun way of then when you're reading through knowing that. So
great. I love a little flashback. Yes. I loved that part of the book. And that it was different years. It was like 18 years, 5 years, yes. All that kind of good stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have to have you back again when the next one comes out next year.
I would love that. Awesome. I would love that.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.